I believe it's important to look at the beginning stages of the natural approach to learning languages to help us develop or refine our own language learning strategy. My name is Franklin, and this is first1000hours.com. I'm here to inspire and motivate you to complete your first 1,000 hours of your language learning marathon. I don't teach languages, but I share an out-of-the-box mentality to help you learn languages on your own in a real-world context. And this is why we're continuing to talk about the natural approach to learning languages today. But before we begin, I just want to give a shout out to JLux and Canadian Queen 76. Both of them reported that their listening comprehension in Spanish is increasing. And for that, I just want to say to both of you, JLux and Canadian Queen 76, congratulations. So let's get into the natural approach. One of the nice things about the natural approach, in my opinion, is from day one, the natural approach wants the students to focus on comprehension versus speaking. So they really want the students to understand the language that they're listening to, because they believe that if they can comprehend the language from day one, then that can help them to break down some mental barriers to thinking like, oh man, I'm never going to understand the language. Oh man, I have to understand like all this grammar and everything like this before I will begin to understand anything in the language. But they do things in such a way that the student can comprehend the language from day one. And I'll explain more about that in a second. But first, I'm wondering, when you were in your first language learning class, if you went to like high school or college or something like that, how were your first few days like? Now, the only formal class I've taken was Latin. I took that in high school. My Latin teacher was very passionate about what she was doing. Most of us passed the national Latin exam. I didn't do that the first year, and I felt like out of place. But the second year I did that. But I never took a formal class in school outside of an after-school Spanish class where the language was something that was spoken. So I'm wondering again, what were your first few days in your class like, whether that was in Spanish or French or German or whatever you were taking? And so I wanted to share some of the rules of the natural approach. So let's pretend that the teacher is bilingual. The teacher knows English and also French. So this would be the rules. Your teacher will speak in French exclusively. Okay, so I was imagining how would I teach a class, or how would I do a class? And so I would think that sometimes I would want to have immersion. So I would want to speak in my native language if I was helping people learn English, for example. And it says also, you may answer either in English or in French. Now, this is powerful. I never thought of the fact that the students could either answer in their native tongue or in the tongue that they're trying to learn, the native language that they're trying to learn, which in this example would be French. And so what that does is that allows the student to speak at his or her own pace. They don't have to worry about getting into speaking too fast. And that's basically, again, the way that we learned our first language. We were not really forced into having to speak. We just spoke when we were ready to, but we were hearing other people speak in our target language that we were trying to learn, or really, I guess that was our native language, but we didn't know the language. So we were listening to that language, and then when we felt like we could speak, then we would do that. So it says, you should not try to use French until you are comfortable doing so. This, of course, applies only to classes with a common language with which the instructor understands. So to me, this shows the importance of being bilingual, because then you can use that to your advantage as well. And okay, so point number 2 is, when you do try to speak the new language, the teacher is interested in what you have to say, not whether you have said it perfectly. Neither you nor the teacher will be overly concerned with grammar errors in your speech while you are a beginner. So I like that as well. Again, there's language learning classes that go a lot into grammar and drill and all of that. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't know something about grammar, but the question is, how do people learn grammar? Um, for instance, when you are speaking to someone, are you thinking about like the 100 different or 1,000 of different grammar rules that you are supposed to have when you are speaking? Do you think about, okay, well, before I say this sentence, what was that grammar rule that I remember in school? Okay, that was, oh yeah, that was the grammar rule. So now I can speak the sentence. No, we just speak because we have had a lot of exposure, which Dr. Krashen would say, comprehensible input over time that helps us to understand how we are to speak. And we do that without really thinking about that. And I have to talk a little bit more in future videos, I guess, about thoughts on grammar. Like, how do we actually acquire grammar? Is it through really consciously focusing on grammar rules, or do we just absorb it through comprehensible input? Obviously, I think you know it's comprehensible input, but I want to build a case, a solid case about that as well. And basically, I'm going to share with you a lot of the things that Dr. Krashen has shared, which I think are important. But I'll probably share some other things as well. So when you're taking the focus off of, speaking all this, with the perfect grammar or whatever, you're allowing the student to focus on what is the most important, I believe, at the beginning, which is comprehending the language. And the other thing I like about this is that the student is free to make mistakes. And guess what? Are you going to make mistakes in language learning? Yes. If you want to get to a high level, you are going to make mistakes. If you want to stay at a beginner level, not ever try to make a mistake, then you're going to be at a very low level. But if you get to a high level, you're going to make mistakes. But that does not mean that if you make a mistake in grammar, that means that that's going to be your whole story in language learning. If you look at babies, they make mistakes, right? But they continue to stay in the language, stay in the language that they're trying to learn in an environment, and they eventually learn how to say things better. And that would be the same case with us. And I should say another thing with this now, or another thing that my language motivational partner, Connie Warner, shares with me, or has shared with me, is that speaking a lot of times is the performance part. We get really excited about that, excited about speaking and all of that. But when we are spending that time with the language, listening to it, reading things in the target language, watching things or whatever, we're learning more about the correct ways that we are to express that language, especially if we're watching videos where people are speaking properly in the language. That's what I do, and I hope that's what you're doing too. And then it prepares us for speech. Okay, so let me go on here. Point number 3. In the rules, it says you do not have to use full sentences. You may talk in short phrases or even use just one word when that is appropriate. And we're going to build on that. That is such a powerful point. And then it says, point number 4, remember that as long as you understand what the teacher is saying, you are acquiring French. That means you should focus on what is being said, the message, rather than on how it is being said. So again, focus on comprehension is a big part of the natural approach. So, okay, that's the theory, right? But and we're going a little bit more in theory, but we want to know, how do they actually apply that theory? And so one thing that they use is something called total physical response, or TPR. You'll see that there's different videos on YouTube of demonstrations of people using TPR. And so one of the TPR methods is you can tell the students to stand up. And when you're saying the word stand up, you actually stand up. Or you can tell the students to sit down, and then you and the students sit down. Or you can say turn around. And so you turn around, and then the students turn around. So they're actually using their body to actually help them to comprehend the language. And since you're using like both parts of your brain as well, the right and the left hemisphere, it's helpful, I believe, in learning the language as well. But again, you're able to say what what you're doing. You're saying stand up, and then the student is mimicking you, and they don't even have to say a word, but they're understanding what that means. Now, then they build on this concept, because let's say that if all the student knows is the names of the students in the classroom, that's going to help with comprehension. For instance, there might be a student named Hannah in the class, and so you can say, class, look at Hannah. So then you look at Hannah, and you say, Hannah has long brown hair. And so you can ask the students, who has long brown hair? And all the students, again, have to know is that word Hannah. As far as speaking that word, all they have to speak is Hannah, but they're getting to be exposed to a lot more vocabulary, long brown hair, and all of that, and what it means to look at a student as well. And another example they give is using magazines, but I'm going to say you can use cookbooks, okay? But they're saying magazines, and you can say, okay, class, I want you to look at this cookbook, and in this cookbook is a picture of veggie fajitas, okay? And then you could even give this to, let's say, Tom, who might be in the class, and you say, class, who has a picture of the veggie fajitas? And then all the class, again, has to know is the name of that person, and they can say Tom. And so let's say that you have a magazine, and that magazine might have a picture of a sailboat. And so you can give that picture of, that magazine that has a picture of the sailboat to Hank. And so you can ask the class, who has the picture of the sailboat? Is it Hank or is it Tom? And so then they're getting to kind of stretch their mind a little bit more, and the student can think, Tom has the picture of the veggie fajitas, so it must be Hank who has a picture of the sailboat. And so it continues to build on the comprehension, but again, just using a little bit of words. The student just has to speak just a little bit in those examples, and especially if the names are familiar to them already. Like Hank is not you could say an uncommon name in the United States. That's not something that would be really difficult for a student to say right from day one, but they might be learning a lot of words that are unfamiliar to them, but it's done in a way that is very comprehensible. Okay, so it gets more advanced afterwards in the natural approach, but that's just basically how they do things to start out the classroom. And one of the points that they had in that book is it is relatively simple to teach comprehension without requiring more than minimal production. And basically through these examples, we can see that is the case. So the question is, what can we learn from the natural approach? I believe that there are 3 takeaways that we can get at least from the natural approach. And that is focus on the context when you're in real world situations. And I talked about that in the previous video. Also, you want to learn from comprehensible input. And so you want to learn from things where you can kind of at least understand something from what you're trying to figure out in that language. And for me, what makes the language comprehensible, a big thing that makes language learning comprehensible to me is reading. And I think that's the key to unlock a language many times. But obviously, if you're watching something on YouTube as well, and especially if you're able to, if you know how to read, then if you are watching something on YouTube with the subtitles in the target language that you're trying to learn, then that's going to help the language be a little bit more comprehensible because you know how to read. I've also done a video on how you can have double subtitles so that you will be able to have the words from the target language on the screen and then also words in your own native language. And so I'm going to put a card up here if you want to find out how can you have double subtitles on YouTube so that you can make language learning comprehensible from day one. And then also another key thing that I learned from this is you can learn from interesting content. So for instance, when we're talking about Hannah, who has that long brown hair, Hannah is in the classroom, and so you're able to talk about Hannah, and so that would be relevant to the students that are in that classroom. And so I like to read and listen to things that are interesting to me, and I've talked about that on First 1,000 Hours, and I have playlists of different things that I have watched in Spanish, and I also talk about things that are interesting to me that I have read in Spanish. So what I want to do is I also I want to put on this video a video that you can click on so that you can see a classroom that incorporates the TPR method of teaching. So that will make it, I think, a little bit more practical. And then I'm also going to put a playlist in this video of how I have been able to read in my target language, which is Spanish. My name is Franklin, and this is First1,000hours.com.